Selamat siang, Assalamualaikum. Nama saya Sharyn dan asalnya saya dari Australia, tapi sekarang saya tinggal di sini datang di AUT. Hello, good afternoon. As I just said, Sharyn, I'm originally from Australia, but I've been based here in New Zealand for 16 years, and I'm just going to talk today a little bit about my research in Indonesia. And I met someone, we have students coming on the Union Aid program from Indonesia, and I met with them the other day, and I was talking to students, and I was saying that I've been learning Indonesian since this time, but I have been going since been mostly focused on research. I just thought I'd a slide here. Just most of my research has been looking at gender and sexuality. To Indonesian. They're published through Yayasan. The Indonesian copy than the English one. My most part of a team looking at disaster risk. So this is prone to different disasters. Resilience, risk from disasters. Skills you need in order to help community disaster, what to do before a disaster. Hard kind of labour in terms of recreating the city, so redesigning roads, things like that. But what in that approach with disaster, and particularly experience. And if we don't have women on the ground looking at how that disaster risk reduction can be done, things are often developed in a way that suits particular people. So you might have seen there's been a report published recently about seatbelts. So people who designed seatbelts were men, tend to be bigger than women, and it holds a small framed woman. So there happens with disaster risk. The team was with at Gadjah Mada University, and so the project was to ensure that people are prepared in the face of disaster and that they can rebuild their lives as quickly as possible after that. And women often get forgotten in that process. And the reason why it's really important to have women included in that process before the emergency, but afterwards, is because while disasters don't discriminate, people do. So existing socioeconomic conditions mean that disasters can lead to different outcomes. groups suffer more than others, and women at every level of society throughout greater vulnerabilities to disasters. So it's hard. So some of women and girls suffer higher rates of mortality, so they're more likely to die. They suffer higher rates of morbidity, which is that they get things that are more likely to lead to their death. And they have economic disadvantage. So gender shapes 4 factors of vulnerability. So economic, women everywhere, including at AUT, earn less than men. And how much money you have impacts whether you can buy a car or whether you can buy a bus ticket to get out of a city. Social, physical, and environmental. So how to reduce their risk to disasters. And also to recognise the strengths of women. So women can add value to reduce by disaster. Women themselves often feel that they don't have much to contribute. If you go to a village and say, I want you to talk to me about what you need in order to be prepared in case a tsunami comes, they will very likely defer and say you should go to Kepala Desa or the village headman. I don't know anything. They do. And so it's empowering women to be able to have a voice. There's a few exceptions, but in compared to men. So if you look at Cyclone Naris in Myanmar, 61%. In the 2004 Asian tsunami, women in India account more women than men died during the 2000 wave, and in France, most deaths during Hurricane New Orleans. So overall, women and children are 14 times more likely than men to die during a natural disaster. For this, escape, women running harder. The man is off doing his thing and can run alone, the woman can't. And literally, maybe messages are sent out, but who is more likely to have a phone? The man. What are literacy levels like? Are women actually even able to read the messages that are? So everywhere, women have less education and are less literate than their male peers. To swim, so had no chance. They're not taught to climb trees in the way that boys are encouraged to go up a tree. Girls are not taught that. Less likely to be able to do that. Same with running. So part of can be embedded within disaster risk management. Yes. I'm getting double now. That good? Okay. Is that gender impact? So build a shelter, for instance, get there in the same way that men can. So we need to include a gender perspective in disaster reduction efforts at the national, at the regional and international levels, and look at that in policies, in strategies, in action plans and in programs. Climate change. So disaggregated by sex. So not just how many people are impacted by X, but how does this impact women compared to men? To take gender-aware steps to reduce the negative impact of disasters on women, particularly in relation to their roles in rural areas. So to provide information and technology. And to increase women's participation and representation in all levels of decision making. And this is something not just specific to Indonesia, but everywhere in the world needs to increase the representation at decision making levels. So the it worked in Lombok. So we've got Bengkulu, Saluma, Agam, Pesir, Selatan, and Mataram. And so one project that they've built is a vertical evacuation shelter. It looks similar to this, but it's more of a bamboo structure. And so for the kind of the hard sciences and the engineers and the geophys people, they're looking at this structure thinking, what impact will a wave have on it? What is the geology underground that will be impacted? Is it sand-based? How will the metal withhold certain levels of stress? What I look at when I see this is, how are women going to get there? So they had a practice run. Everybody knew the practice was going to happen at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. So the women knew to feed the kids and get ready, and the buzzer went. And beautiful sunny day, walked there to the shelter. But one of my thoughts on that was, what happens if it's midnight on a Saturday night? There's no electricity, there's no lighting for the jungle path to get there. Women are at home, perhaps with a disability, perhaps with a health issue. They have 3 children and elderly parents. They can't just suddenly get up and run. So it's going to impact them very differently than it may impact men. Brought in ways to think about what happens, for instance, in different cases. So can we think about the different types of people trying to access the shelter? What questions do we have to ask? So how will they get there? Who are they responsible for? What makes access difficult for them? Do they need permission to leave? How will they know where it is and when to go? How can we solve these problems? How can women be empowered to get others to the shelter? And what can women contribute? And it's probably not unique to women, probably all women are more likely to think to bring drinking water and food than men. So how do we empower women to do what they do routinely? Okay, we're going to the shelter, we need water, we need a blanket, we need a raincoat. You know, and my husband is wonderful, but he's probably less likely to remember that stuff than me. So how do we empower them to do that? So we ran, I wasn't part of the focus groups, but the team ran some focus groups to ask these questions. And one of them, a woman participant, said, we have provision issues that have not addressed gender. In relation to the men, there's rice supply, but we haven't thought about the needs of women and children. That's our current problem. Because women and children have special needs, infants need formula, breastfeeding mothers need special nutrition, women have special needs. We haven't addressed that. Another one said, have you done it with the sellers at traditional markets? Because I'm afraid that they worry more about their goods. In some cases, during evacuation, the women don't want to evacuate, they fear looting. Me too sometimes. In the market, most sellers are women. So the idea that a woman would suddenly be able to just run to a shelter, if her job is tukang kaki lima, so she's a roadside food seller, and all of her worldly possessions are in this food trolley, she's not going to leave that because it won't be there when she comes back, and that's her livelihood gone. How is she going to feed her kids if someone steals all her Indomie that has been sitting there? So how can we think about her reasons for wanting to not evacuate and enable her to do that? So reproductive health is also left out. We have reproductive health problems as well. How do we think about reproductive health during and after disaster? So I showed the vertical evacuation shelter before. If a woman is menstruating and needs to leave the house and is stuck up on this shelter for potentially 24 hours and bleeding, she's probably likely to not want to go at all and be too shamed and too shy to leave the house because she's bleeding and doesn't have any menstrual products. So she will stay in the house because she's so full of shame, but she'll die. But earthquake, which we have to treat. This happened when I was in the social office. At school, a student was asked for a referral to a psychiatrist. The person was busy saying there was going to be a tsunami on December 12th. Then I said they had to be what if this is also included in the pre-disaster preparation. The earthquake impact is quite bothersome already. Imagine now an earthquake, a tsunami coming. But then how do we deal with that impending trauma? What do we tell our children? How are our kids going to sleep well tonight when they think at any moment, a wave could be washing over them? So how to make disaster risk reduction gender sensitive? So we need to acknowledge the diversity of genders everywhere, including in Indonesia. So women, men, transpuan, waria, calalai, so the LGBT community. Acknowledge patriarchy and the power of religion and use to the advantage. So one of my arguments is that in Indonesia and many other places, patriarchy is very strong. And you could have a battle and a fight and say, women should be able to, for instance, leave the house without discussing that with their husband or their father. They should be able to leave any time. So you could have that argument, or you could try and use patriarchy to meet your own ends. So in Indonesia, a woman's role is as wife and mother, first and foremost. Even Megawati, when she was president, said, my first and second job are as wife, mother, and then as president. So how do you use this role of women to enable them to be able to participate in disaster reduction? And you say, well, their first role is as a wife and as a mother. If you want them to do that job, you need to send them to this seminar where they will learn about protecting themselves, protecting their children. So rather than challenge patriarchy and religion, use that as a way to empower women to be more prepared for disasters. To acknowledge intersectionality. So it's not that women are disadvantaged because they're women alone, they're disadvantaged if they're women, if they're older, if they have a disability. So all of these intersectional factors come into play, and we have to really think about those when we're planning for disaster risk management. And creating songs, arts and stories. So messages, if they're sent out with just text, there's going to be some members of the community who can't read very well necessarily. So are there other ways to inform that community? Can we use songs? Can we use short skits? Are there other types of artwork that can convey those messages? So we've just submitted our report, which will go to the Indonesian government and hopefully have some impact and will hopefully also help MFAT in its further projects, not just in Indonesia, but in the greater region, in terms of how they're looking at disaster risk reduction and really thinking about the role of women and how women can be empowered, their particular vulnerabilities and also their strengths, so that they can both survive disasters and get their lives back on track after that. Okay, so that's my talk for today. Terima kasih atas perhatian Anda. Oh, great. Yeah, I'm very happy to have questions. That would be lovely if anyone has one.
I'd like to ask you about the DRR in the education setting. You don't know when the disaster happens. Can be in the night, can be during the school hour, and then we understand that we don't have yet the massive programs for the students to learn how about the risk reduction. Disasters. Is there any lesson learned from you how the probably deal with the stand-up program?
Yeah, so part of the STIRD project, they've been going into a lot of schools. Sadly, a lot of the work was done in Palu before the latest earthquake, and members of the team have just gone back in the last couple of weeks to assess how people got on and to see if any of their interventions had an impact. But they certainly were working with schools in a way to enable kids to be prepared for disasters, how kind of the trauma that's associated even before a disaster happens. So they think something is going to happen, it's incredibly traumatic, and then of course after that. And looking at ways that messages can be tailored towards children so that they can understand those messages, and also listening to children as to what they think is a good way for disaster risk reduction to happen, both in the preparation and also in the follow-up. Yeah, but Indonesia is such a big...
With 150,000 schools.
Yeah. And with all the decentralization, it's very hard to get messages across, and with different cultural and religious settings and all the different groups, having just one central plan is never going to be as effective, but catering for all of the different groups is also impossible, so incredible challenges. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. My question is, so you talked about how we should not just think of men and women, but also people who are not considered men and women. Can you please think of any examples of what unique challenges and unique perspectives they have?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is with the LGBT community in Indonesia, and things have changed pretty radically since 2016 in terms of acceptance and government policy towards that. But I think there are still opportunities in the disaster risk management space. So it was one example where I did a lot of my fieldwork in South Sulawesi in Sengkang. The Waria community, so this is the trans women community, have played a pretty incredible role in being able to move between men's spaces and women's spaces. And so one of the trans women is that they can be with women if a disaster strikes, and then can help because they often don't have children and often not necessarily responsible for elder parents. So bringing the trans women community in to support women in evacuations, both with carrying children and food preparation and all of that, is one way that I think will be really productive to, rather than exclude a particular community, bring them in and see what their strengths are and what they can offer in terms of evacuation processes. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Thank you. I just would like to share the update of our program in the education area, how to prevent our students with the disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I think in one of the country that as a pilot in how to the safe school. Because we already set up our construction with let's say disaster proof, something like that. Even sometimes proof from earthquake, but not proof from flooding, because there's different,
Yeah.
different situation. And also, we already included our module, something like module, in the teaching learning process, how to prevent the disaster in our students.
Oh, great.
So the issue is not men or women, but all of people in Indonesia. We still have problem how to prevent disaster when the disaster coming.
Yeah.
This is our problem.
Yeah, yeah.
We try to,
Yeah, looking at all of that, but all those disasters. But it's great to see there's progress then in getting into schools. Yeah, thank you. Ya, silakan Pak. Terserah Pak. Report?
Contohnya, kalau menurut pengalaman yang saya lihat di dekat kota saya waktu terjadi erupsi gunung Merapi,
Oh.
justru kita
Di Malang Pak. Di Malang.
bukan Jogja.
Oh Jogja, iya.
Kita malah justru mendahulukan anak-anak dan perempuan. Kita sudah mulai apa itu orang-orang Indonesia, Austria dan semuanya mulai mendahulukan anak-anak dulu.
Iya.
Orang tua. Karena yang laki-laki yang sudah pasti
Iya.
sendiri sendiri.
Iya. Yeah.
we already there.
Yeah, help. Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, best case scenario, everyone is there, but often they pray, for instance, all the men will be at the mosque and women will be there. Or in fishing communities, the men are out fishing, for instance, and women are left at home a lot of the time on their own. So yeah.
Somebody else will be there now.
Well, we hope, inshallah. Silakan.
Thank you so much.
So, I mean, Indonesia is actually one of the high. So everybody else an advantage that even in computers, but they'll have mobile technologies through WeChat.
99% Indonesian.
Yeah, for example, for the Merapi eruption of 2010, there is a community named Merapi that was successful to have the government to just
Yeah. But yeah, that's very true.
Someone is really good handling that thing because they know. And it was so quick. Look, we almost did not have any victims from that except Amancha because it doesn't want to take out from the mountain.
No, and to Guru.
They have all device for every single village.
Yeah.
They look at there. They have liquor and government.
Yeah, I think. Different places. Some places it might, and others, yeah, not. So. Yeah. 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 Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Just unmic later. Thank you.
But decided I should come back to meet you and to come to the forum. In fact, the ambassador told me 2 weeks ago that I was doing a keynote speech at the forum, the tourism forum on Thursday. I said, but I'm in China. And he looked at me. He said, okay, I'll come back. So I came back 3 days ago, and we had a very good tourism forum on Thursday. All morning we had a number of ministers from the Pacific Islands. And then in the afternoon I had my session. Of course, everybody had had a very big lunch at that time. So I had the afternoon session, so I decided I had to make it a little bit more lively. So I played a Queen song, Don't Stop Me Now, and everybody woke up, and I had a great time. I don't know if others had fun, but it was very good. And of course, I'm Professor of Tourism, as well as being Vice President International here at AUT. So being able to talk about tourism at the forum was great for me, and of course very important that a forum should take place both for Indonesia and for the Pacific Islands, because it is so important to all those countries. And I know that your president has said that tourism is one of the pillars of the economy, and has suggested that all the ministries should support tourism, which I think is great. I think New Zealand should follow in the same model. It's not so long ago, actually, that the Prime Minister of New Zealand was also the Minister of Tourism. You may remember John Key. He was also the Minister of Tourism, and that was great for tourism in New Zealand. And in fact, tourism is now our #1 export, even more than dairy, milk, and other foodstuffs. Tourism is #1. #3, or maybe #4, is export education, which are very important to New Zealand as well. And I'd just like to also mention that we have been very honoured not only to have you visiting, Minister, but we had your President last year came to New Zealand and Wellington, and it was great. I was the only member of education that joined the meeting with your Prime Minister, and that was very good. And I think he found that very useful. Am I supposed to be facing that way?
No.
Right, okay. I thought you were looking there, so maybe I
There's all Indonesia around the world.
Absolutely.
Looking at it. But no, you're perfect. They can't see us.
Oh, I see.
We can just see them.
Right. I thought for a minute I was supposed to be talking this way. So I think you're aware that we have a very close relationship with the people of Indonesia, and Minister, we were just remembering that we met maybe 6-7 years ago.
Yes,
10
years ago.
10 years ago at Muhammad Malang University when you were the president, the rector, and my colleague Chris Hawley brought me to your university. And it's very nice that you remember Chris. The minister was asking if Chris Hawley was here. Chris still works for AUT part-time. He tried to retire, but we said no. You have to carry on working because we know that in Asia it's all about relationships. And Chris has done so much work for AUT and has such a strong profile. In Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, he has been a great asset. And it's a shame that he's not been here today, but I will pass on your good wishes to him. And of course, we have a great relationship with the Ministry of Education and Culture. We were very honoured to deliver a number of programmes for the Ministry. We had a lot of fun with the cultural workers that came here probably 3 years ago. 4, is it?
Yeah, 2016, 27.
My life. And I'm even older now as well. So we had 50 cultural workers, but we're still friends with many of them. We're still in contact. And they did a wonderful performance for us in our marae, which we all enjoyed. And they even did a dance. And I was watching this dance, and I thought, it looks a bit like Maori. And I thought, how strange, Indonesian Maori. It actually turned out that they had seen Maori dancing and they had decided to do an Indonesian interpretation of a Maori dance. So it was really very good. And we've had a delegation of vocational teachers. Yes, 40 of them teachers. Yes, and they came. And again, they did a performance for us as well. And they made us dance. And they made us come forward and they put things on us, clothes to wear, and we had to dance. Not very well, but we tried. So I think you probably get a sense that we have a close relationship, and we are enjoying very much this event that's taking place. And I know that it was a sudden thing for you to come here, but thank you for coming. And at AUT, we appreciate that. And it's great that we're able to hold this event where we're streaming the event to other locations in Indonesia, indeed your old university, and some other institutions. And I think now we're going to have a haka Maori performance. So I don't know if you know what a haka is. Haka is traditionally a Maori war dance. So I tell you so that you don't get scared, because the most common haka the people are aware of is for rugby. The New Zealand All Blacks rugby team always do a haka before the start of a game. And the reason for the haka is it's actually a recognition of the opposition, but also the idea is that they're supposed to scare the opposition a little bit as well. I'm not New Zealand, I'm English. So when the English play rugby against the All Blacks, they stand very quietly like this. Well, the All Blacks do their haka performance. So our students are going to do a haka for you. The haka is used in many ways in New Zealand. It's not now just a war dance. It is also recognition for important events, for important people, or for celebration. So you will see haka performed when people come like you. You even see haka at funerals, at weddings, and they're very powerful and emotional events for Maori and for New Zealanders, and hopefully for listeners as well. So I hope that you enjoy it. You don't have to be scared. I promise that there will be no unpleasantness. Everybody will be kind afterwards. So this is just a recognition of you coming to visit us. And I think it's being streamed.
So but we'll take 3 of them through.
So say.
Pak Menteri boleh ke dalam.
And the rest will be on the seat here.
So we can't all go into
Sisanya
this
ada di
room.
sini. Ya.
So we just take 3 of you. So you are defenceless.
I'm not there.
You have to be there, yes.
Get scared from
I'm on your side.